My girlfriend updated her bio to independent queen right after we argued about rent. I reacted with a thumbs up and texted, "Perfect, utilities are in your name now." 15 minutes later, she was standing in the dark hallway, watching the power shut off, realizing I meant it. I, 28, male, watched the power shut off in real time as my girlfriend stood in the hallway, phone screen illuminating her confused face. 15 minutes earlier, she had updated her Instagram bio to independent queen right after telling me she would not be contributing to this month's rent. I had given her post a simple thumbs up. Then I texted her one line, "Perfect, utilities are in your name now." She laughed when she read it. She thought I was bluffing. At 6:47 p.m., the lights went dark. The refrigerator hum died. The Wi-Fi router blinked off. She was standing 3 feet from me in the hallway when it happened, holding a glass of wine, mid-sentence about how I needed to respect her boundaries. The wine glass stayed frozen in her hand. Her mouth opened slightly. She turned toward the breaker box like it might explain something. It would not. I had called the utility company that morning. I had removed my automatic payment. The account was in her name. The bill was 2 months overdue. I had been paying it quietly directly through my bank. Now I was not. She looked at me. I looked back. I did not move. 2 months ago, Maya and I had been together for a year and a half. She was 26, worked part-time as a social media manager for a small boutique, and posted daily about empowerment, independence, and self-care. Her captions were always sharp. "Never settle. Know your worth. Queens don't beg." She had 4,000 followers. She posted quotes over sunset photos. She posted selfies with motivational text overlays. She posted stories about being her own boss, building her empire, refusing to dim her light for anyone. I supported all of it. I thought it was healthy. I thought she was driven. What I did not realize at first was that her independence had a silent sponsor. Me. We moved in together after 8 months. The lease required both names, but the utilities were set up under her accounts because she handled the initial setup. Rent was split 50-50 on paper. In reality, I had covered her half 4 times in 6 months. The first time, she had an unexpected car repair. The second time, her freelance client paid late. The third time, she said her therapy bills were higher than expected. The fourth time, she did not offer a reason. She just said she was short and would get it back to me. She never did. I did not push. I made good money as a project manager. She made less. It felt reasonable to help, but the posts kept coming. Build your own table. Self-made and proud. Financial freedom is the best freedom. I started noticing things in March. She bought a new leather jacket, $300, posted it with the caption, "Invest in yourself." A week later, she went to a spa day with friends, $180 for the facial and massage. Another post, "Self-care is not selfish." That same week, I paid the full electric bill, the internet bill, and covered her share of groceries because she said she was waiting on a client payment. I did not say anything. I figured the payment would come through. It did not. The client payment excuse appeared again in April. I checked our shared expenses list. She had not contributed to groceries in 5 weeks. I had been covering cleaning supplies, toilet paper, dish soap, trash bags, everything. When I mentioned it casually, she said she thought we were just flowing naturally, and she would catch up when her business picked up. Business. She worked 12 hours a week. I worked 50. I let it go. Then came the birthday dinner, her friend's birthday. Maya insisted on going to an upscale place downtown. Cocktails were $18 each. She ordered 3. I paid the bill. $240. On the drive home, she posted a photo of the table with the caption, "Surround yourself with queens who uplift you." The next morning, I checked the rent account. She had not transferred her half. I texted her. She replied, "Can you cover me this month? I'll get you back." No explanation, no timeline. I covered it. In early May, the pattern became impossible to ignore. I sat down one Saturday and went through our expenses for the past 6 months. Rent, utilities, groceries, household supplies, streaming services, internet, her car insurance, which she had asked me to add to my payment plan temporarily after her card got declined. Temporary had become permanent. I totaled it. Over 6 months, I had covered $8,300 more than my share. She had contributed exactly half the rent twice. Everything else was on me. I stared at the spreadsheet. I thought about the posts, the selfies with designer coffee cups, the gym membership she signed up for and posted about but attended twice. The assertion that she was building her empire. Her empire was funded by me. That night, I brought it up. I kept my tone calm. I said we needed to talk about finances. She immediately got defensive. She said I was being controlling. She said she never asked me to pay for things. I reminded her that she absolutely had. She said those were loans and she always intended to pay me back. I asked when. She said when her business stabilized. I asked what that meant. She said I was pressuring her and she needed space to think. 2 days later, she posted a quote, "A real partner uplifts, not criticizes." The argument that broke everything happened on a Thursday evening in late May. Rent was due the next day. I asked her if she had her half ready. She said no. She said she had an unexpected expense. I asked what it was. She said it was personal. I asked when she would have it. She said she did not know. I reminded her that this was the 5th month in a row. She exploded. She said I was obsessed with money. She said I was making her feel small. She said a real man would not keep score. She said she contributed in other ways. I asked what ways. She listed cooking dinner sometimes, buying candles, keeping the apartment aesthetic. I pointed out that I had paid for the groceries she cooked with, the furniture the candles sat on, the Wi-Fi that let her post photos of the aesthetic apartment. She called me petty. She said I was ruining the relationship with my negativity. She said she needed to focus on her own growth, and I was holding her back. She walked out of the room. 10 minutes later, she updated her Instagram bio. Independent queen. Then she posted a story. Black screen. White text. When someone tries to dim your light, shine brighter. She tagged it with the location of our apartment. I sat on the couch. I opened my banking app. I went to automatic payments. I removed the utility company. I removed the internet provider. I kept the lease payment for rent because my name was on it, but I made a note to address that next. Then I went to her Instagram. I liked the post. I gave it a thumbs up. She was in the bedroom. I heard her phone buzz. 30 seconds later, I sent her a text. Perfect. Utilities are in your name now. Looking forward to seeing that independence in action. I heard her laugh. It was sharp. She called out from the bedroom. You're really that insecure? I did not reply. I went to the kitchen. I made a sandwich. At 6:47 p.m., the apartment went dark. The refrigerator stopped humming. The Wi-Fi router lights died. The TV cut off mid-scene. I heard Maya's voice from the hallway. What the hell? She came around the corner holding her phone, using the screen as a flashlight. She looked at me. I was still eating my sandwich in the dim light from the window. She said, Did the power go out? I said, no. It got shut off. She stared. What? I said, the bill's 2 months overdue. It's in your name. I stopped paying it this morning. Her face went blank, then confused, then something between panic and anger. She checked her phone. She opened her email. I watched her scroll. Her finger stopped. She clicked. Her face went pale. The email was from the utility company. Final notice. Account past due. Service disconnected. $2,147 owed. She looked up at me. She said, You were paying this? I said, I was. She said, Why would you stop? I said, Because you're independent now. I thought you would want to handle it yourself. She laughed, but it sounded thin. She said, This is insane. You're punishing me for wanting respect. I said, I'm not punishing you. I'm just not subsidizing you anymore. She said, Subsidizing? Her voice went up. We're in a relationship. People help each other. I said, You're right. Help goes both ways. I've been helping for 6 months. You've been posting about independence while I covered your half of everything. Now you can actually be independent. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She said, You can't just turn off the power. I said, I did not. The utility company did. The account's in your name. You have to call them. She said, I don't have $2,000. I said, Then you'll need to figure that out. She spent the next 20 minutes on the phone with the utility company. They told her the account could be reconnected once the balance was paid in full or a payment plan was established. Minimum payment to reconnect, $600, plus a reconnection fee. She did not have it. She hung up. She looked at me. She said, "Can you just pay it for now and I'll pay you back?" I said, "No." She said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Completely." She said, "Where am I supposed to get $600 tonight?" I said, "I don't know, maybe one of the queens who uplift you." Her face went red. She said, "This is cruel." I said, "What's cruel is taking advantage of someone for 6 months and then calling them controlling when they notice." She said, "I never took advantage of you." I pulled out my phone. I opened the spreadsheet. I turned the screen toward her. I said, $8,300. That's how much more I've paid than you in 6 months. Rent, utilities, groceries, internet, insurance, everything. She stared at the screen. She did not reach for the phone. She said, "You've been keeping track?" I said, "I started keeping track when I realized you weren't planning to pay me back." She said, "I was going to." I said, "When?" Silence. She tried a different angle. She softened her voice. She said, "Babe, I know I've been struggling, but you know my business is just starting. I'm building something. I need support right now." I said, "You're not building a business. You work 12 hours a week. The rest of the time you're posting about independence while I pay your bills." She said, "That's not fair." I said, "What's not fair is pretending to be self-made when someone else is funding your life." She said, "I contribute in other ways." I said, "Like what? Aesthetic candles?" She flinched. She said, "You're being mean." I said, "I'm being honest." She said, "I can't believe you're doing this over money." I said, "I'm not doing this over money. I'm doing this because you updated your bio to Independent Queen 30 seconds after refusing to pay rent, then posted a passive-aggressive story about me while standing in an apartment I've been paying for. That's not independence. That's performance." Her jaw tightened. She said, "I'm calling my mom." I said, "Okay." She went to the bedroom. I heard her talking. Her voice was high. I caught pieces. "He turned off the power. He's being controlling. He's keeping score of every dollar." 20 minutes later, she came back out. She said, "My mom's wiring me money. I'll get the power back on tomorrow." I said, "Good." She said, "But we need to talk about this relationship. I don't think I can be with someone who weaponizes money." I said, "I'm not weaponizing anything. I'm just not paying your share anymore." She said, "That's the same thing." I said, "No. Weaponizing would be holding it over you. I'm just stepping back and letting you handle what's yours." She said, "The account's in my name because you told me to set it up that way." I said, "And I've been paying it for 6 months. Now I'm not. You're an independent queen. This should be exciting for you." She glared. She said, "You're an asshole." I said, "Maybe, but I'm an asshole with his lights on." She grabbed her keys. She left. She did not come back that night. The next morning, I woke up to 17 texts from Maya. Most of them were angry, some were pleading, a few were apologies mixed with blame. The last one said, "I transferred money to the utility company. Power should be back this afternoon. Can we please talk?" I replied, "Sure." She came home at 4 p.m. The power was back on. She walked in, put her bag down, and sat across from me. She said, "I'm sorry I called you an asshole." I said, "Okay." She said, "But I still think you went too far." I said, "How?" She said, "You embarrassed me. You made me call my mom for money. You made me look like I can't take care of myself." I said, "You can't. Not financially. That's the point." She said, "That's not true." I pulled out the spreadsheet again. I said, "This is 6 months of data. Show me 1 month where you paid your full share." She said, "I told you I was going through a transition." I said, "For 6 months?" She did not answer. I said, "You're not transitioning. You're choosing not to contribute. And that would be fine if you were honest about it. But you're not. You're posting about being independent and self-made while I'm paying for everything. That's the problem." She tried to redirect. She said, "What do you want from me?" I said, "I want you to either contribute equally or stop pretending you're independent." She said, "I can't afford to contribute equally right now." I said, "Then get a full-time job." She said, "I'm building my brand." I said, "Your brand is 12 hours a week of work and 30 hours a week of Instagram. That's not a business. That's a hobby." She said, "You don't understand entrepreneurship." I said, "I understand math." And the math says you're $8,000 in the red. She said, "Why are you being so cold?" I said, "I'm not being cold. I'm being clear. You have two options. Start paying half of everything or move out and be independent somewhere else." She stared. She said, "You're giving me an ultimatum?" I said, "I'm giving you a choice." She said, "That's not a choice. That's you kicking me out." I said, "I'm not kicking you out. I'm saying if you want to stay, you need to contribute. If you can't or won't, then yes, you should find a place you can afford." Her eyes filled. She said, I can't believe you." She stood. She walked to the bedroom. She slammed the door. That evening, she posted another story. It was a quote. "Sometimes the trash takes itself out." I screenshotted it, not because I cared, but because I knew it was evidence of her pattern. An hour later, her best friend Qley texted me, "What did you do to Maya?" I replied, "I stopped paying her bills." Qley wrote back, "That's messed up. She's going through a hard time." I said, "For 6 months? While posting about being an independent queen?" Qley said, "She's trying to build her business." I sent Qley the spreadsheet. I said, "This is what I've covered while she's been building. Let me know if you think that's fair." Qley did not reply for 2 hours. When she did, she said, "I didn't know it was that much." I said, "Neither did she, apparently." Qley said, "She's still my friend." I said, "That's fine. I'm just letting you know the reality." Qley stopped responding. The next day, I noticed Maya had deleted the trash story. Over the next week, Maya tried multiple approaches. She tried guilt. "I thought you loved me." I said, "I do. That's why I'm being honest instead of enabling you." She tried bargaining. "What if I pay you back $50 a month?" I said. "At that rate, you'll be paid off in 14 years. "No." She tried anger. "You're controlling and toxic." I said, "You're projecting." She tried seduction. "Come on, let's just forget this and go back to how things were." I said, "How things were is exactly the problem." She tried involving her friends. 3 of them sent me messages calling me heartless. I sent them all the same spreadsheet. 2 apologized. 1 blocked me. Maya tried her mother again. Her mom called me. She said, "Young man, relationships are about partnership." I said, "I agree. That's why I'm asking Maya to partner with me financially instead of depending on me." Her mom said she's going through a phase. I said, "Her phase has cost me $8,000. How long should I wait?" Her mom hung up. By the second week, Maya's posts changed. She stopped posting about independence. She started posting vague, sad quotes. "Not everyone is who they say they are. Sometimes you give your heart to the wrong person. Growth is painful." I did not engage. I also did not pay for anything beyond my half of the rent. She bought her own groceries. She paid the internet bill late, and it got shut off for 2 days until she scraped together the payment. She started picking up more freelance hours. She complained constantly. "I'm exhausted. I don't have time for myself anymore. This is unsustainable." I said, "This is what independence looks like." She said, "I hate you." I said, "You don't hate me. You hate accountability." She threw a pillow at me. It missed. She went to her room. That night, I heard her crying. I did not go in. Not because I did not care, but because I knew if I did, I would fold. I would pay her bills again. I would become her safety net again, and nothing would change. On the 3rd week, Maya told me she was moving out. She said her friend had a spare room she could rent for cheap. I said, "Okay." She looked surprised. She said, "That's it? Just okay?" I said, "What do you want me to say?" She said, "I don't know. Maybe try to stop me." I said, "Why would I do that? You've made it clear you can't afford to live here and contribute equally. Moving somewhere cheaper makes sense." She said, "Do you even care?" I said, "I care about you. I don't care about pretending this arrangement works when it doesn't." She said, "You're really okay with this?" I said, "I'm not thrilled, but I'm not going to beg you to stay so I can keep paying your bills." She said, "That's all I am to you? A bill?" I said, "No, but that's what the relationship became. You performing independence online while I funded your life. I'm not interested in that anymore." She said, "You're going to regret this." I said, "Maybe." She packed her things over the next 3 days. I helped carry boxes to her friend's car. She cried twice. I stayed calm. When the last box was loaded, she stood in the doorway. She said, "I really did love you." I said, "I believe you. I also think you love the stability I provided more than you love me." She said, "That's not true." I said, "Then prove it. Go be independent. Build your business. Come back when you can actually contribute to a partnership." She said, "What if I don't come back?" I said, "Then I'll know I made the right call." 4 weeks after Maya moved out, I got a message from Qley. "Maya's struggling. She can't afford her rent. Her roommate's asking her to leave." I did not reply. 2 days later, Maya texted me, "Can we talk?" I said, "About what?" She said, "I miss you." I said, "Do you miss me or do you miss the financial stability?" She said, "That's mean." I said, "It's a real question." She said, "Both, okay? I miss both." I said, "At least you're honest now." She said, "Can I come back?" "I'll do better." I said, "Define better." She said, "I'll pay my half. I'll get a full-time job." I said, "You should do that anyway. Not because of me, because you're 26 and you need to build a real foundation." She said, "I know." She said, "I was living in a fantasy, the posts, the aesthetic. I thought if I looked successful online, it would become real." I said, "That's not how life works." She said, "I know that now." I said, "Good, but we're not getting back together." She said, "Why not?" I said, "Because I don't trust that you've actually changed. You've been independent for 4 weeks and you're already asking to come back. That tells me you haven't learned the lesson yet." 6 months later, I ran into Maya at a coffee shop. She looked different, tired but more grounded. She was dressed for work, business casual. We talked briefly. She said she got a full-time job as a marketing coordinator, 40 hours a week, benefits. She said she deleted Instagram for 3 months to reset her mindset. She said she was sharing an apartment with 2 roommates and actually paying her rent on time. She said, "What? You were right. I was performing instead of building." I said, "I'm glad you figured it out." She said, "Are you seeing anyone?" I said, "I am." She nodded. She looked sad but not bitter. She said, "Is she good to you?" I said, "She's a partner, real one. We split everything. We're both building together." Maya said, "That's good. You deserve that." I said, "So do you." She smiled. It was small but real. She said, "Maybe I'll get there." I said, "You will. Just keep showing up." She said, "I'm trying." I walked out of the coffee shop and texted my girlfriend Emma. "Running 5 minutes late. Want anything?" She replied, "Just you." We had been together for 4 months. She worked as a senior analyst at a tech company. She made more than I did. We split rent, utilities, groceries, everything down the middle. She never posted about being an independent queen. She just was one. When I got home, she was cooking dinner. Real dinner, not aesthetic Instagram dinner. I told her about running into Maya. Emma said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Relieved, for both of us." She said, "Good." She handed me a plate. We ate together. The lights stayed on. The bills were paid. Nobody was performing. We were just 2 people building something real together.